Deep in the mesa country, where the red rock towers stood like ancient sentinels against an endless sky, a man discovered that mercy could be more dangerous than violence. Elijah Crane rode toward his cabin that evening and found him sitting by the dried creek bed, a young man, barely more than a boy, his leg twisted at an angle that made Elijah's stomach turn. He wore Comanche clothing, his black hair tangled with dust and blood from a gash above his eye. The sun was setting behind the western mesa, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. But Elijah barely noticed the colors. His attention was fixed on the figure by the creek, on the careful calculation he was making about what to do next. In his experience, finding someone hurt in the wilderness meant one of three things. First, it could be a genuine accident, a traveler who'd fallen or been thrown from their horse. Second, it could be bait, someone pretending to be injured to lure Good Samaritans into an ambush. Third, it could be a test, a situation where his response would be observed and judged by people he couldn't see. Looking at the Comanche boy, Elijah suspected option 3. But that didn't change what he was going to do. The boy's hand moved toward a knife at his belt when Elijah dismounted, but the movement was weak, defensive rather than aggressive. He'd been there for hours, maybe longer. Dehydration had already started to claim him. When Elijah knelt and offered his canteen, the boy stared at him with eyes that held equal measures of fear and defiance. Thirst won over pride. He drank deep, 3 long pulls that emptied half the container. Then he looked at Elijah as if memorizing his face, trying to understand what kind of man would help an enemy. Elijah didn't speak. He just set the canteen down, walked to his horse, and brought back a length of rope and some strips of cloth. The leg needed setting, and that was going to hurt. The boy seemed to understand. He nodded once, then bit down on a stick while Elijah worked. Not a sound escaped his lips, even when the bone shifted back into place. By the time Elijah had splinted the leg and wrapped it tight, the sun had dropped below the mesa rim. He left the boy with the canteen, a bag of dried meat, and a blanket against the coming cold. Then he rode to his cabin, thinking that would be the end of it. He was wrong. Elijah Crane had built his life on the principle of staying out of other people's business. His ranch sat in a shallow canyon where the rock walls provided natural windbreaks, and a seasonal stream kept the grass green enough for a small herd. The nearest town was 4 days' ride east. He'd chosen this isolation deliberately. No neighbors meant no disputes. No visitors meant no complications. Just cattle, horses, and the kind of quiet that let a man forget the things he'd rather not remember. He wasn't running from the law. Not exactly, but there were people back east who'd be happy to see him hang for choices made in anger years ago. Out here, the past was just a story no one knew to ask about. He was simply Elijah Crane, rancher, a man who kept to himself and expected others to do the same. The canyon had been his sanctuary for 3 years now. He'd built the cabin with his own hands, felling timber from the mesa slopes and hauling it down piece by piece. The corral had taken 2 months of work, digging post holes into the rocky ground until his shoulders ached and his hands bled. The well had been the hardest part, 12 feet of digging through layers of stone and clay before he hit water. But every drop of sweat had been worth it. This place was his, really his, not rented, not borrowed, not dependent on anyone else's goodwill. When the world went mad, as it often did, he had somewhere to retreat. When men killed each other over politics and land and all the other things men killed each other over, he was here, safe, alone. Until now, that evening, after leaving the Comanche boy by the creek bed, Elijah went about his routine, fed the horses, checked the fence line where coyotes had been testing the post, started a fire in the stone hearth. But his mind kept returning to the boy's eyes, not grateful, not pleading, just aware, watching, calculating. The kind of look that came from someone who'd been trained to assess threats since childhood. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, maybe younger, but he'd taken the pain of having his legs set without a sound, just bit down on that stick and let it happen. That kind of endurance wasn't learned in a season. It was bred into people who'd grown up knowing that weakness meant death. Elijah thought about his own youth, the farm in Ohio, the brothers and sisters he'd left behind when he went west. The war that had changed everything turned him into something he still couldn't look at directly. He'd been soft once, green, the kind of boy who cried when the family dog died. That boy was long dead, killed somewhere between the battlefields and the blood-soaked years that followed. What walked around in his body now was something harder, more cautious, with fewer illusions about what people were capable of. He told himself it didn't matter. The Comanche boy would heal enough to travel, then rejoin his people. That was that. But that night, lying on his cot with the fire crackling low, Elijah couldn't shake a feeling that had settled into his bones. Something had changed. The balance of his isolated existence had shifted, and there was no shifting it back. The horses knew it too. They stamped and snorted in the corral, restless in ways they hadn't been for months. Once, the spotted mare let out a whinny that echoed off the canyon walls and made Elijah reach for the rifle he kept by the door. Nothing followed, just wind and shadows and the distant yip of coyotes hunting in the mesa country. He slept poorly and woke before dawn. Elijah stepped outside as the first gray light touched the canyon rim. The air was cold, sharp with the smell of sage and dust. He stretched, feeling his joints crack, and scanned the familiar landscape. Everything looked normal. The cattle were scattered across the canyon floor, grazing. The horses stood calm in the corral. The canyon had never felt more like home than it did in these early morning moments. The way the light painted the red rock walls, the sound of the seasonal stream trickling over stones, the smell of the land, ancient and patient, waiting for nothing and nobody. Elijah had come here to disappear, and he'd succeeded. 3 years without a visitor, 3 years without a conversation longer than a few words exchanged at the trading post in town. 3 years of perfect, purposeful isolation. It had been good years, healing years. The nightmares came less often now. The memories of what he'd done during the war had faded from bleeding wounds to old scars. He'd built something. Here, not just a ranch, but a life, a peace. Then he looked up at the mesa rim. His blood went cold. They lined the ridge like statues carved from the rock itself. Warriors on horseback, motionless, watching. He counted quickly. 30, 40, more appearing as the light grew stronger. They covered the eastern rim, then the western, then the narrow passage at the canyon's north end. Everywhere he looked, more riders. Comanche warriors in full war dress, painted faces and feathered lances catching the first rays of sunlight. They weren't advancing. They weren't making any sound at all. They were simply there, surrounding his canyon like wolves around a wounded deer, waiting. Elijah's hand moved toward his rifle, then stopped. What good would one rifle do against an army? He'd be dead before he could reload. Instead, he stepped into the open, making himself visible, showing that he wasn't going to run. A single rider broke from the group on the eastern rim. The horse picked its way down, the steep trail with the sure-footed grace of an animal born to this terrain. The rider was older than the others, his face weathered by decades of sun and wind, his bearing radiating authority. He carried no weapon in his hands, but a war lance was strapped to his horse, and a knife gleamed at his belt. He stopped 30 feet from where Elijah stood. For a long moment, neither man moved. Then the warrior raised one hand, not in greeting, not in threat, just raised it and held it there, waiting for something Elijah couldn't name. Elijah's heart hammered against his ribs. He forced himself to breathe, to think. This was a test. Had to be. If they wanted him dead, he'd already be dead. They'd had all night to put an arrow through his window, or burn his cabin to the ground. Instead, they'd waited for sunrise, waited for him to see them. That meant something. He stepped forward, matching the warrior's gesture, raised his own hand, held it steady. The warrior's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. He lowered his hand and dismounted. His movements were deliberate, almost ceremonial. He walked forward 10 paces and stopped. Elijah did the same. They stood facing each other across 20 feet of rocky ground. Two men from different worlds trying to read each other's intentions. The warrior pointed, not at Elijah, at the direction of the dried creek bed where Elijah had found the boy. Elijah's stomach dropped. The boy. Of course, this wasn't about territory or cattle, or any of the usual frontier disputes. This was about a broken-legged Comanche boy and a white man who'd helped him instead of leaving him to die. The warrior made a gesture, pouring, drinking. The meaning was clear. Elijah nodded slowly. Yes, water. He'd given water to the boy. Yesterday. The warrior's eyes narrowed. He spoke rapidly in Comanche, words Elijah couldn't understand, but the tone was questioning. Probing, then movement on the ridge. Another rider coming down the slope, smaller than the warriors, riding with the same controlled grace, but wrapped in blankets despite the cold. It took Elijah a moment to recognize the figure, the boy from the creek bed. He rode down slowly, his splinted leg jutting awkwardly to one side. When he reached the canyon floor, he dismounted with difficulty, leaning heavily on his horse. Then he limped toward Elijah and the warrior, stopping between them. He spoke to the warrior in Comanche, long, detailed, gestures toward Elijah, towards his leg, toward the canteen still visible on Elijah's belt. The warrior listened without expression, asking occasional questions that the boy answered with what seemed like reluctance. Finally, the warrior turned to Elijah and spoke a single word in broken English. Why? Elijah met his eyes. He was hurt, needed help. The warrior stared at him for a long moment, Then he turned to the boy and spoke rapidly in Comanche. The boy's eyes widened. He argued back, his voice rising, but the warrior cut him off with a sharp gesture. The boy fell silent, his jaw tight with frustration. The warrior turned back to Elijah. "My son," he said, the English words rough, clear. "You help my son." Elijah felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The boy was the chief's son, the chief of what looked like an entire war band of Comanche warriors. And Elijah had just splinted his leg and given him water, like he was helping a stray dog. The weight of that realization settled on him like a physical thing. One wrong move 3 days ago, one moment of fear or greed, and he'd be dead right now. If he'd tried to capture the boy for ransom, they'd have found his body spread across the canyon floor. If he'd refused to help, the same. If he'd reported the encounter to the soldiers in town, 50 warriors would have burned his ranch to the ground. But he hadn't done any of those things. He'd just seen someone who needed help and provided it. No calculation, no scheme, just basic human decency. And apparently, that was rare enough to earn him a week of observation and a conversation with a war chief. "I didn't know," Elijah said carefully. "He was hurt. That's all I saw." The warrior studied him. "Most white men see Comanche boy. They kill or capture, sell to soldiers. You help. Why?" "Because he needed help," Elijah repeated. "Doesn't matter who he is. A man with a broken leg and no water isn't a threat. He's just a man who needs help." The warrior's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or surprise. He turned to his son and spoke rapidly in Comanche. The language was harsh and musical at the same time, full of sounds that Elijah's ears couldn't quite parse. The boy responded, his voice lower now, thoughtful. He gestured toward his leg, toward Elijah, toward the canyon. Whatever he was saying, it seemed to carry weight. His father listened without interrupting, which Elijah took as a sign of respect. Finally, the warrior looked at Elijah again. "We watch," he said. 3 days, 4 days. See what kind of man you are." Elijah's throat tightened. "And what did you decide?" "Not decide yet." The warrior pointed at the canyon, at the cabin, at the cattle. "You stay, we watch more. You try run, you die. You try fight, you die. You stay, do nothing. We see truth." "What truth?" "If you help because good man, or help because want something." The warrior's eyes were hard as obsidian. "White men always want something." Elijah stood very still. He understood now. This wasn't a siege. It was a trial. They were going to watch him like hawks watching a mouse, waiting for him to make a wrong move, to reveal his true nature. "How long?" he asked. The warrior didn't answer. He simply turned, walked back to his horse, and mounted. The boy followed more slowly, struggling with his injured leg but refusing help. They rode back up the slope together, joining the warriors on the ridge. Elijah stood in his canyon as the sun climbed higher. The Comanche settled into positions on the mesa rims, becoming part of the landscape. Smoke would rise from their fires at dusk. Sentries would rotate through the night. They would watch every move he made, every choice, every moment. He was a prisoner in his own home, and he had no idea when or if the sentence would end. The first day of the siege was the hardest. Elijah stayed close to the cabin, moving only when necessary, speaking to the horses in low tones just to break the oppressive silence. The warriors on the ridges didn't move much either. They sat their horses like statues, watching, always watching. He counted them obsessively, 53 on the eastern rim, 28 on the western, 15 guarding the northern gap. The southern gap was left open, tantalizingly so, an invitation to run, a trap waiting to be sprung. Elijah wasn't stupid enough to take the bait. By noon, the heat was brutal, the kind of dry, skull-crushing heat that made men do stupid things. He drew water from the stream and filled the horse trough, wondering if the Comanche were watching to see if he'd try to signal somehow. Use the water to flash sunlight toward the town. Pour it in patterns that might be read as code. He did neither, just watered his horses and went back to the cabin. The second day brought a new development. A group of warriors descended from the eastern ridge and set up a more permanent camp about half a mile from his property. He could see their fires at dusk, their horses grazing on the mesa grass. They weren't hiding anymore. They were settling in. That night he heard drums, not loud, not threatening, a steady rhythm that carried across the canyon like a heartbeat. The horses didn't like it. They stamped and snorted, pressing against the far side of the corral. Elijah stood at his window and watched the fires flicker on the ridge. The third day, the chief's son came down to watch him work. Running Wolf sat his horse near the corral, silent, observing. Elijah repaired a section of fence without acknowledging him. When he was done, the boy rode back up the slope without a word. It was a strange kind of communication. They were learning each other's rhythms, testing boundaries without crossing them. 4 days passed. The warriors remained on the ridges like stone guardians. They rotated positions but never left. Elijah tried to continue his normal routines, but nothing felt normal anymore. He fed the horses under dozens of watchful eyes. He moved cattle from one grazing area to another, knowing every step was being analyzed. He drew water from the seasonal stream and wondered if they were counting each bucket. On the 5th morning, something had changed. A bundle sat by his cabin door, wrapped in hide, inside dried meat, a clay jar of water, and a small pouch of herbs. Medicine, maybe, or a gesture of goodwill. Elijah ate the meat and kept the rest. By the 6th day, the isolation was getting to him. He'd always valued solitude, but this was different. This was being examined like an insect under glass. He started talking to the horses, just to hear his own voice. On the 7th day, the boy came back. He rode down from the eastern ridge alone, his legs still splinted but his seat more confident than before. He stopped 10 feet from where Elijah stood by the corral. "You still here?" the boy said. His English was better than Elijah had expected, clearer. He'd been educated somewhere, or taught by someone who spoke the language well. "Didn't have much choice," Elijah replied. "You could run, take horse at night, try to escape, and die before I made it a mile. No thanks." The boy almost smiled. "Almost. You are smarter than most white men. I've had practice." The boy dismounted, grimacing as his weight shifted onto the splinted leg. He walked closer, studying Elijah with an intensity that reminded him of the chief. The same measuring gaze, the same sense of being weighed and evaluated. "My father tests you," the boy said. "He tests everyone, but you are different test." "How so?" "Other white men, they show fear. They beg. They offer money, horses, anything to save their lives." The boy's eyes narrowed. "You just wait, like you already know outcome and accept it." "Maybe I do." "What outcome you accept? Whatever happens, happens. Fighting won't change it. Begging won't change it. All I can do is be who I am and let your father decide if that's enough." The boy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You set my leg. Most white men would have left me to die, or killed me to prevent trouble. I'm not most white men." "Why?" Elijah thought about how to answer. The truth was complicated, tied up in things he'd done years ago that still haunted him. But some truths were simpler. "Because I've been hurt before. I know what it feels like to need help and not get it. I didn't want to be the kind of man who walks past suffering when he can do something about it." The boy studied him. Then he turned and looked up at the ridge, where his father sat watching. "My name is Running Wolf," he said. "My father is Stone Bear, war chief of the Quahati band. We came to these lands because soldiers drove us from our home further east. Now soldiers follow us here." He paused. "We cannot trust white men. They lie. They break promises. They take what they want and call it law. Not all of us." "Then prove it." Running Wolf looked at him directly. "My father watches for 7 days. He watches how you treat your animals, how you work your land, whether you try to signal other white men. So far you pass, but the real test is coming." "What test?" Running Wolf pointed south toward the gap in the canyon walls. "White men are coming, soldiers and settlers. They hunt us. They heard we were in this territory. Soon they will find your canyon. When they come, you will have to choose." "Choose what?" "To help them find us, or to keep silent." Running Wolf's voice hardened. "Most white men would choose their own kind. They would tell soldiers where we camp, where we water our horses, where our women and children hide. That is the test my father waits for." Elijah felt the weight of the choice settling on him before it was even offered. "And if I don't tell them, then you are truly different, and my father will remember." Running Wolf's voice carried conviction. "Among my people, debts of life are sacred. You saved my life when you had no reason to. You could have left me to die. You could have captured me, sold me to soldiers. You did neither. That means something. And if I do tell them?" Running Wolf's hand moved to the knife at his belt. His eyes went cold, the playfulness vanishing like smoke in wind. "Then I will kill you myself, slowly. For every kindness you showed me, I will repay with equal patience." The words hung in the air between them. Elijah had heard threats before, during the war, during the hard years after, but something in Running Wolf's voice told him this wasn't posturing. It was a promise, as binding as any contract. Elijah nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Running Wolf stared at him for a long moment. Then surprisingly he laughed, a short bark of genuine amusement that transformed his face from warrior to young man. "You are strange, white man. Very strange." He mounted his horse, grimacing at the pain in his leg but refusing to show weakness. "I hope you make the right choice. I do not want to kill the man who saved my life. It would be," he searched for the word, "inconvenient." He rode back up the slope. Elijah watched him go, feeling the weight of what was coming settle into his bones. 3 days later, the soldiers came. Elijah heard them before he saw them. The rumble of hooves, the jangle of equipment, the organized sounds of a military column on the move. They came through the southern gap in the canyon walls, 24 mounted soldiers in blue uniforms, led by an officer with a dust-covered face and hard eyes, the 5th Cavalry. Elijah recognized the insignia. They'd been fighting Comanche and Kiowa across the southern plains for years. Hardened men, professional killers in uniform. Behind them came a group of settlers, 10, maybe 15 men in civilian clothes, carrying rifles and the kind of expressions that spoke of old grudges and fresh anger. They weren't regular militia. These were men who'd lost something to the tribes and wanted blood in return. The Comanche had vanished from the ridges at dawn, melting into the mesa country like shadows at sunrise. But Elijah knew they were still out there, watching, waiting to see what he would do. This was the moment of truth. 7 days of observation had led to this single point. Every choice he'd made, every routine he'd followed, every word he'd spoken to his horses. All of it was prologue to what happened now. The officer raised a hand and the column stopped. He rode forward alone, stopping his horse 10 feet from where Elijah stood by his cabin. "You the rancher here?" the officer asked. His voice was tired but alert, the voice of a man who'd been hunting something dangerous for too long. "Elijah Crane, this is my land." The officer nodded. "Captain Marcus Webb, 5th Cavalry. We're tracking a Comanche warband. Reports say they were seen in this area 3 days ago." He leaned forward in his saddle. "You seen any Indians around here?" Elijah felt the weight of the moment. 50 warriors watching from somewhere in the Mesa country. A chief who'd given him 7 days to prove himself. A boy whose leg he'd splinted and whose life was now tied to his silence. "I've seen signs," Elijah said carefully. "Tracks mostly, but they passed through a few days back. Headed north, best I could tell." The officer studied him. "You sure about that?" "Saw the tracks myself. Looked like they were moving fast. Probably knew you were coming." One of the settlers pushed forward, a big man with a thick beard and angry eyes. "He's lying. Apache lover probably. Look at this place. Middle of nowhere. No neighbors. Perfect spot for trading with hostiles. They're Comanche," Elijah said mildly. "Not Apache. Different tribe. Different territory." The bearded man's face reddened. "You think I give a damn about the difference? Indians are Indians. They burned my brother's homestead. Killed his whole family. And you're telling me you haven't seen nothing? I'm telling you what I saw. Tracks heading north. That's all." Captain Webb held up a hand to silence the settler. His eyes never left Elijah's face. "You're a long way from any settlement, Mr. Crane. Most men in your position would be nervous about Comanche in the area. You seem awfully calm." "I've been out here 3 years," Elijah said. "First year I was scared of everything. Second year I learned what was actually dangerous and what wasn't. Third year I figured out that scared doesn't help. If they wanted me dead, I'd be dead. Since I'm not, worrying about it doesn't do any good." The captain's expression shifted. Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "That's a practical philosophy. It's kept me alive." The bearded settler wasn't satisfied. He pushed his horse forward, crowding into Elijah's space. "I say we search this place. Check for signs of trading, weapons, supplies, anything that proves he's been helping them. Search all you want," Elijah said, not backing down. "I've got nothing to hide." The captain considered for a moment, then nodded. "Roberts, take 2 men and check the cabin and outbuildings. The rest of you, water the horses and take 15 minutes. The soldiers dismounted. 3 of them headed toward Elijah's cabin, while the others led horses to the stream. The settlers hung back, watching with suspicious eyes. Elijah stood still as the soldiers searched his home. He had nothing incriminating. No Comanche weapons, no trade goods, no evidence of contact with the warband, just the cabin of a solitary rancher living at the edge of civilization. But he did have something, the bundle of dried meat and herbs that Running Wolf's people had left him. It sat on a shelf by the window, clearly visible to anyone who looked. One of the soldiers noticed it. He picked up the hide-wrapped package, examined it, and called out, "Captain, got something here." Webb walked over and took the bundle. He unwrapped it, looked at the contents, then looked at Elijah. "This is Indian work. Found it by my door 3 days ago," Elijah said. It wasn't quite a lie. Didn't know what to make of it. "And you didn't think to mention that when I asked if you'd seen any Indians?" "You asked if I'd seen them. I hadn't. Just found that bundle. Could have been left by anyone passing through." The captain's eyes narrowed. He knew there was more to the story. Elijah could see the calculation happening behind those tired eyes, but proof was something else entirely. "Captain," one of the soldiers came running. "From the ridge trail. Fresh tracks up here. Lots of them. They were definitely camped on the ridge. Left recently. Maybe a few hours ago." The bearded settler surged forward. "I knew it! He's been hiding them. Probably warned them we were coming." "I was asleep when you arrived," Elijah said calmly. "How would I warn anyone? Signals, smoke, Something. There's been no smoke from this canyon. You would have seen it from miles away. Elijah kept his voice level. They were watching the trails. They saw you coming long before you got here. They didn't need me to warn them of anything. Captain Webb held up a hand again, silencing the settler. He looked at the ridge where his soldier was pointing, then back at Elijah. You're telling me 50 Comanche warriors were camped on your property for days, and you just let them be? What was I supposed to do? Fight them? One man against 50? I stayed in my cabin, kept my head down, and waited for them to leave. That's survival, Captain, not collaboration. The captain was silent for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. Mount up. We're moving north. Captain! The bearded settler protested, his face reddening with anger. We're moving north, Mr. Harris. The tracks lead that way. That's where we're going. He looked at Elijah one last time, eyes searching for something. You're either the luckiest man in the territory, Mr. Crane, or you're a better liar than anyone I've ever met. Either way, I'd suggest you think about relocating. This area is about to become a war zone. I'll take it under advisement. The captain almost smiled. Almost. You've got guts, I'll give you that. Most men in your position would be halfway to panic by now. You're just standing there like, this is a normal Tuesday. Every day is about the same out here, Elijah said. Sun comes up, sun goes down. Work gets done, people come, people go. Panicking doesn't change any of that. The captain shook his head slowly. You're a strange man, Crane. Strange but honest. I almost believe you. He turned his horse and called out orders. Within minutes, the column was moving, riding north through the canyon and out the other side. The settlers followed reluctantly, the bearded man glaring at Elijah until he disappeared around the canyon wall. Elijah stood alone in the silence that followed. The canyon felt different now, emptier. The air seemed to vibrate with potential, with the sense that something had shifted and wouldn't shift back. He walked to the ridge trail and looked up at the mesa rim. A single figure stood there, stone bare, watching from the edge. Even from this distance, Elijah could see the old chief's posture change. He raised one hand, not a greeting, an acknowledgement. Then he turned and disappeared into the mesa country. Elijah let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The test was over. He'd passed. But as he walked back to his cabin, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The soldiers would hunt, the Comanche would fight, and he was caught in the middle, a white man wearing no colors. Trusted by neither side, but trusted by both. It was a precarious position, but for now, it was where he stood. 2 weeks passed. The soldiers didn't return, neither did the Comanche. Elijah fell back into his routine, but everything felt different now. He caught himself watching the ridges, waiting for movement. He kept the bundle of dried meat on his shelf, a reminder of what had happened and what it meant. On the 15th day, Running Wolf returned. He came alone, riding down from the eastern ridge in the early morning light. His leg was still splinted, but he moved more easily now. The bone was healing. He stopped by the corral where Elijah was working. My father sends message, Running Wolf said without preamble. I'm listening. Soldiers go east. They chase shadows. My people are safe for now. He paused. Because of you. Elijah shook his head. I just told the truth. They went north because the tracks went north. You could have told them where we hide, where our women and children wait. You did not. Running Wolf dismounted and walked closer. My father says you have earned our trust. That is rare for white man. Very rare. What does that mean? Running Wolf reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out something wrapped in leather. He unwrapped it slowly, revealing a necklace. Intricate beadwork on a leather cord. Red and black beads arranged in a pattern that seemed to hold meaning. Protection mark, Running Wolf said. You wear this. Our people know you are friend. They will not harm you. They will not take from you. If you need help, they will give it. Elijah looked at the necklace. It was beautifully made, the beadwork precise and detailed, but he understood what accepting it meant. If I wear this and white men see it, they'll call me a traitor. Yes, Running Wolf's eyes met his. That is the choice. Protection from us, or trust from your people. You cannot have both. Elijah thought about Captain Webb, the bearded settler, the town 4 days east where he occasionally traded for supplies. If he wore this necklace, he'd be marked. Outcast. Suspect. But he also thought about Stone Bear, Running Wolf, the 50 warriors who'd watched him for days and decided he was worth trusting. In a territory where violence was the common language, he'd found another way. He took the necklace and put it over his head. The beadwork settled against his chest, cool and smooth against his skin, carrying the weight of tradition and meaning he was only beginning to understand. The choice was made. He'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. From this moment forward, he wasn't just Elijah Crane, solitary rancher. He was Elijah Crane, friend of the Comanche, ally, protected person, marked man. It changed everything and nothing. He was still the same person he'd been yesterday, still the same man who'd given water to a dying boy without asking questions. But now that act had consequences. Now it had meaning beyond the moment. Now it connected him to something larger than himself, to a people he barely knew and a conflict he tried to avoid. I made my choice, he said quietly. Same choice I made when I found you by the creek. I chose to help someone who needed it. Everything else is just consequences. Running Wolf studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded once, a gesture that carried more weight than any words. My father was right about you, he said. You are strange for a white man, but strange is not always bad. What happens now? Now? Running Wolf mounted his horse. Now we are allies. When you need help, we help. When we need water, we take from your stream. We share this land like neighbors, not enemies. That simple? Nothing simple about it. Running Wolf's expression grew serious. My people have made peace with white men before. Treaties signed, promises made. Every time. Promises broken. Soldiers come, take land, kill buffalo, push us further west. My grandfather remembers when Comanche rode from the mountains to the great river. Now we run from soldiers in our own homeland. Elijah nodded slowly. I'm not the government. I can't make promises for anyone but myself. That is why my father trusts you. You not promise big things. You just do small things. Give water, set bone, keep silence. Small things that show who you really are. Running Wolf turned his horse toward the ridge. My father says watch a man when he thinks no one sees. That is when truth shows. For 7 days, we watch. You not change. You do same things alone as you do when watched. That is rare. I don't know any other way to be. Most men know many ways to be. Different face for every situation. You are same always. That is either great strength or great weakness. Father, not sure which. What do you think? Running Wolf considered the question. I think man who saves enemies. Son deserves benefit of doubt. Ask me again in 10 years. Soldiers will come back. Settlers will come. War is coming to this territory whether we want it or not. But when it comes, you will know where you stand, and so will we. He kicked his horse into motion, riding up the slope without looking back. Elijah watched until he disappeared over the rim. Then he touched the necklace at his chest. The beadwork was warm against his skin. He'd made his choice, and now he'd have to live with it. That evening, as the sun set behind the mesa, Elijah sat on the porch of his cabin and watched the shadows lengthen across the canyon. He thought about the life he'd built here, the solitude he'd craved, the peace he'd found. It was changing. The world was pressing in, forcing him to take sides in a conflict he'd tried to avoid. But maybe that was unavoidable. Maybe the only real choice was how to face the change when it came. He'd chosen mercy over fear, compassion over convenience, trust over suspicion. Those choices had consequences. But looking at the beadwork on his chest, feeling the weight of what it represented, he couldn't bring himself to regret them. The necklace was more than decoration. It was a promise, a bond, a statement to anyone who saw it that Elijah Crane had chosen a path different from most white men in this territory. He'd be judged for it, probably hated for it, possibly killed for it, but he'd also be trusted by people who had every reason to distrust men who looked like him. He'd be protected by warriors who could have killed him a dozen times over. He'd be remembered as something other than an enemy in a land where war was coming. That mattered. Somewhere out there in the Mesa country, 50 Comanche warriors were making camp. Women were cooking, children were playing, elders were telling stories around fires that had burned for generations. Life was continuing, despite the soldiers hunting them, despite the settlers pushing into their territory, despite everything. They'd been driven from their homeland once, probably be driven again. The march of what white men called civilization was relentless, and it showed no signs of slowing. But for now, tonight, they were alive, free, together. And they knew there was one white man who'd chosen to help instead of harm, one rancher who'd offered water to a dying boy and silence to an army, one ally in a world of enemies. It wasn't much, but it was something. Elijah thought about Running Wolf. The boy would carry the scar of his injury for the rest of his life, a limp probably, a reminder of the time he'd been tested and found wanting by his own people's standards, but also a reminder of the stranger who'd helped him when he needed it most. Maybe someday, years from now, Running Wolf would be a chief himself, and maybe he'd remember this canyon, this white man, this strange alliance forged from a canteen of water and a splinted leg. Maybe he'd pass the story on to his children, and they'd pass it to theirs. Stories were how people survived, how truths were preserved through generations of violence and loss. The Comanche had been telling stories around fires for centuries before white men ever set foot on this continent. They'd keep telling them long after Elijah Crane was dust and bones. Maybe his story would be among them. The water bearer, the man who chose mercy. Elijah went inside as the stars came out. He lit a fire against the coming cold and sat by the window, watching the darkness settle over his canyon. The flames crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls he'd built with his own hands. Tomorrow the soldiers might return, Tomorrow the settlers might come looking for Indian sympathizers. Tomorrow, everything could change. But tonight, he was at peace. He'd found a way to live with honor in a land where honor was becoming rare. And whatever came next, he'd face it the same way he'd faced everything else. One choice at a time. One act of mercy at a time. One moment of decency in a world that seemed determined to destroy it. The fire burned low. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the mesa. The horses settled in the corral, calm now, sensing that the danger had passed. For tonight, at least. Elijah touched the necklace at his chest one more time. Then he banked the fire, lay down on his cot, and let sleep take him. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring, but tonight he'd made peace with his choices. That was enough. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable tale from the frontier, where courage and choices shape destinies in unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider leaving a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means the world to us.